Hey everybody, Jay Weidner here. We're back again. I want to thank you all for watching. Make sure you subscribe, pass it on to your friends, do whatever you can to help the show. I'm going to keep going here. I am going to have a video soon about James Gillian, and we'll talk about him at some future point. But right now, I think the subject that we're about to address today is way more important than some of that silly stuff. We have Jerry Marzinsky, of course. He's the author of this great book, and you should all get it. And just so if you're not watching, it's called An Amazing Journey into the Psychotic Mind by Jerry Marzinsky and Sherry Sweeney. And just to give you a brief recap, Jerry was a psychologist. He worked in prisons. He worked all over the place in hospitals, dealing with seriously psychotic persons. And as he advanced in his career and learned more and more, he began to realize that the voices that people were claiming they were hearing were real, and they weren't them. Those are the two major discoveries, I think, that the voices were real and that they are not the person hearing them. They're exteriorized entities. And I think, Jerry, that actually, if you take this as being the truth, and I do, then this is actually the major root of mental illness. This is, these voices are, well, like I said, I did a non-scientific survey, and a lot of people hear exteriorized voices, and they're almost always malignant. I don't think I've heard yet a benevolent voice coming from these creatures. I have a voice in my head, but it's me. I mean, it's my higher self or whatever, some kind of exterior voice that looks at what I'm doing and tells me when I'm, screwing up and when I'm not. And so, but that's not what this is. And that's why I want to make sure people understand, like Werner Erhard, he does talk about the critic and how you can quell the critic, but that's not what we're talking about here. We're not talking about the critic that lives inside you. We're talking about voices that whisper to you and tell you things that you don't want to hear. You're ugly, you should kill yourself, these kinds of things. And so this, I believe, is at the very basis of our mental illness problem. Would you agree?
Well, yeah, the way you think is at the very basis of that. And before we go on and I get in trouble with the authorities, I want to demote myself from the psychiatrist introduction I got last time. I'm not a psychiatrist, nor am I a full-fledged psychologist. I went through 2 years in supposed to be the best PhD program in the country, and it just made me sick. So I got 4 years of graduate school in counseling and psychology and 35 years on the front lines of mental health.
Yeah, well, I'm not all that impressed with people's education. Hang on here. I'm not too impressed with people's education.
Well,
smartest people I know only got to high school. And
well, I agree with you, but the stuff that I'm bringing up, psychiatry, the Psychiatric Mafia is not going to like this.
Yep.
And neither are psychologists who think they have some secret that they're teaching in graduate school that they're going to impart to you for $50,000 or $100,000, whatever it costs to get through graduate school.
More like
they don't have. They've got nothing. They've got nothing that was of real use to me in working on the front lines, other than allowing me access to a clinical population. It's almost like they have to brainwash you sufficiently before they'll let you have access. So if you tried to walk into a state hospital or something right now and say, hey, I want to talk to some of your patients, you probably wouldn't be allowed. Same thing with the state prison. You just would not be able to get access to these people. So to get a sample of a number of schizophrenics would be almost impossible for the average guy, and virtually impossible for a psychologist who was just trying to walk in there and try to do some investigations. They'd go, oh no, we can't allow that. It's too dangerous. You're going to get hurt, or you got to sign a waiver, and the patient's got to sign a waiver, and it's just not going to happen. So just to get access to find out the stuff that I found out, You know, if you're already working in there, if you're already working in a mental health center or in a psychiatric hospital, you can check this stuff out for yourself. Just don't take my word for it. Ask the patient, which is something psychiatrists just will not do.
Right. That's actually, you're right. You're one of the few people that's been on the front lines for many decades, really, and you've seen this. And I could never have that kind of access, even if I was writing a book. In fact, if I was writing a book or making a documentary about this, they would probably make sure I never had access, right?
Yeah. Yep. You bet. You know,
Because
you would be the crazy guy.
right, and which is interesting. And so you got to have access to all of these people, and you got to see them up close, and you actually took them seriously when they told you they had these voices. And you've
Well,
actually,
at first I wasn't sure.
right.
You know, you know, I believed what I was taught in school, that these things were hallucinations. But, you know, after a while, I saw that whatever these things were, they were the root of whatever was causing the behavior. You know, and it was all maladaptive behavior. So I knew somehow they were linked. But figuring out how to talk to these people about the voices was another story. They don't trust psychologists or psychiatrists. You know, they go to a psychologist or psychiatrist. Well, you're hallucinating. You have to take these toxic medications. There is no cure. And you have to take them for the rest of your life, and you know, they're real expensive. And then they take them and they feel like crap. You know, it's just the side effects are awful. But they kept trying to tell psychiatrists, well, they're real, and the psychiatrists go, no, they're not. This is what you need to believe. They are hallucinations, and your mind is broken. There's a chemical imbalance in there, and you just have to take these meds. There is no other treatment. And any other kind of treatment, any natural treatment or shamans, they're completely blown out by the psychiatric mafia. They don't want to hear it, you know. And they're going, well, what do you want to take us back to the Stone Age? You know, for me, it was whatever worked. And I don't care if it was standing on my head and making grunt noises. If that worked against the voices, I would use it. You know, it had to work.
Well, you have a story that you sent me that's, I presume it's a true story, that occurred to you in one of these prisons. Or was it a prison? No, I don't think it was.
No,
it
was the ER.
Right. It was an ER, and it's called The Black Toads, which is a great title, by the way. Why don't you tell us that story? Because that's a very revealing story. You don't have to, you know, just paraphrase it. You don't have to read it, but you know, you lived it, so you know it. So tell us.
Well, one of the challenges I had working in the ER with what I knew was how to get useful information to the patient so they could use it to help themselves without getting caught by psychiatry or the psych nurses. Or how do I impart information to them as quickly as possible without getting in trouble, and knowing that some of that information is going to set off the voices, and they're going to explode. So one day I walk into the ER, and this was in a major hospital, and here's this gal out in the middle of the annex. So she's surrounded by psych patients in bed with beds, and she's out in the middle. The television's playing, and she's kicking and punching like a karate something or other. And I watch her and walk in, and the psych nurse says, "That's Lily out there. She's your next assignment. She's your next person to evaluate." And I asked, I asked Sue, I said, have you gotten any medication in her yet? She looks like she's pretty animated. She goes, no, I'm still waiting for the order to come through. So, I mean, she's running around, she's kicking, she's punching, at the air, fighting whatever she sees. And I'm supposed to be locking myself into a little 12 by 12 cubic room with her.
Oh my God.
The door locks from the outside, so I can get out from the inside, but nobody can get in from the outside. So if things go bad, which they do very quickly in these kind of situations, nobody can get in there. So I'm asking Sue, I said, how long is it going to be before you can get some meds in her? And she goes, I've requested it, and I'm waiting for the request to come through. And so in the meantime, I pull up her toxicology report, and I see that she just got out of a detox probably a week or so ago. So I know her system isn't flooded with all kinds of drugs, but she was hot for benzos, opiates, marijuana, and amphetamine, but not alcohol, which is good, because alcohol on top of amphetamine is a real bad mixture. And see, these guys, the police drug her in off after she went to a mental health center demanding medicine for the voices. So she missed her 2 appointments. And this particular mental health center, they're trying to save money. So if they don't come 2 in a row, they go, oh, okay, we don't have to pay for you anymore. That's more profit for us. And she was demanding medications, and she was all, pissed off because they had terminated her and she needed the help. She'd been buying Seroquel off the street and she couldn't find it anymore, and the voices were getting stronger and stronger. So she demanded, she caused a big stir in the mental health center. They called the police. The police drug her into the ER and kind of dumped her off, and that's where I met her. So I started looking up her background. So thank heaven they had a electronic medical record system. So she'd been abandoned by her mother, and as a child, she was her father died young of an overdose, but he had repeatedly sexually molested her and brutally beaten her before he died. So at the age of 16, she had a psychotic break, and the voices were telling her to kill herself. And she took an overdose as an adolescent and ended up in a psych hospital then. Her first marriage was an absolute disaster. Her ex-husband beat her. She put a gun to her head, tried to drown her in the sink. And the voices started up and were telling her to kill herself, that everybody would be better off without her. So she went into the bathroom and she slit her wrist in warm water, and she was bleeding out. And her first husband knocked on the door and wanted her to come out. She refused, and she didn't say anything. So he smashed down the door, and then he drug her to the hospital. And the voices were mocking her and telling her to kill herself, saying she was crazy, she was stupid, she deserved to be locked up in the hospital. So that was her first, and she's been in and out of psych hospitals ever since then. So finally, the nurse got her some Ativan, but then she started kicking up over there, and the Ativan hadn't taken effect yet. But she got in the face of this big black patient, and the big black guy was screaming at her to get out from in front of the television, because he was watching TV and she was out there karate kicking and screaming and kicking and punching. And so the black guy started yelling at her, and she got up into the black guy's face and got right in his face and started screaming at him and said, come on, I'll take you on. And I'm looking at this and I'm like, I got to get her out of there. So before the Ativan could kick in, I kind of, the black guy said something like, shut your ass up and do your bullshit away from the television before I kick your ass. And I ran out there and grabbed her and drug her into the interview room. I had my pad that I write on, and closed the door, and it was locked from the outside, and she still wasn't calm from the Ativan yet. So I asked her, hey, what brings you to the Hotel California today? And she went through the episode with the mental health center. I went to the mental health center. I asked them to give me some medicines, and they kicked me out. And when I demanded it, they called the cops, and the cops drugged me in here. And I asked her if she was, the voices were telling her to hurt herself or she was having suicidal ideation. And she said, yeah, she had a loaded gun to her head 2 weeks ago, and the voices were telling her to pull the trigger. She said, yeah, I had my finger on the trigger, and they kept saying, just do it. And I've heard that so many times, the voices, just do it, just do it and get it over with, where they're trying to push the patient into the final thing. And then I said something like, well, they're real bastards, aren't they? And she goes, yeah, they are. So it's almost like at that point, it was like I wasn't discounting them. And she relaxed just with that one phrase.
Sure.
You know, here's somebody who understands at least that they're bastards, that they're not just a hallucination, or they're not positive or neutral. I mean, they're bastards. So she slumped down into a recliner, and I was glad to see that, because it's a little harder to get out of one of those recliners than it is a regular chair. And I asked her, you know, was she hearing them as we were speaking? And she said, not just then. But I asked her when was the last time she heard them, and she said it was in the formal ER. So the psych-annex is attached to the actual emergency room. So they take all the psych patients who are clogging up the beds in the ER and bring them back to the psych-annex for us to determine what we need to do with them. Right. And while she was out there, the voices were telling her that if she gouged out her eye, that they would shut up and they would go away. Now that's the second time I've heard that. The first guy actually did it. And he gouged out his eye, and the voices came back after he did it, and they started mocking him and laughing at him, saying, well, you deserve it. You're so stupid. You listened to us. And now he's disfigured for the rest of his life. So that's going to be generating negative emotional energy the whole time. So I told her, I said, I've heard this once before, and this is what happened. And I told her what happened to the other guy. They didn't stop. You know, you can't trust them as far as you want, as you can throw them. But one thing I noticed with I'll call her Lily, that's not her real name, was she was taking care of herself. She wasn't like some of these other chronic schizophrenic patients. I mean, she was, you know, she wasn't all disheveled and wearing rags and dirty, and I knew that took a lot of effort on her part with the voices she was hearing. So that's the first thing I noticed that was kind of out of kilter with her. That just didn't fit. You know, it wasn't normal. You know, usually they're you know, messed up or disheveled or looking bad. She wasn't. She took care of herself. She didn't poke her eye out because she said she knew that the voices were lying, and she knew they were liars. So that was the second thing that impressed me. I didn't have to tell her that. She'd come to that conclusion on her own. So I went, well, this is a bird of a different color, this lady. Right. So let me see what happened from there. She started telling me about the voice. I asked her about the voices. She said they were strongest after sunset between 3 and 4 in the morning. And that's another thing that happens consistently. That's when they come on the most. That's when they come on the heaviest at those times. I'm not quite sure why that happens.
It has to do with, well, we're going to get into that. So I can actually help you understand why that happens at certain times.
Well, that'd be good. Because I've never never had a resolution when somebody said, well, that's when they hung Christ, or that's when they put Christ on the cross. I don't know, but it's consistent. It's a consistent among all these guys. So, you know, I asked her, well, what happens when she wakes up? She says she wakes up and they're right there to greet her. They're right, you know, and she has nightmares. And then when she wakes up from the nightmares, the voices start. So they put nightmares in the heads of these people also. And then I asked her if she ever saw shadows moving around the room, and most schizophrenics do. They look like either black blobs or three-dimensional black shadows. And one of the things I learned was that most of the time they don't see the eyes. Most of the time, most of them don't see that. But if they do see the eyes, they're either lime green or red.
I've seen the shadow people, and I'm not schizophrenic, and they're real. Mm-hmm. They actually exist, and they don't have eyes. The ones I just saw don't have eyes.
Well, I actually use that as a diagnostic tool. You know, if they didn't see the eyes, they weren't as in bad a shape as if they did see the eyes. Yeah. But I didn't see any difference between the green eyes or the red eyes. But that's the only color that they ever saw, was either lime green or red. So she started talking about them. She saw them. They were three-dimensional shadows. Yep. She didn't see the eyes. It was just a faceless black head. Yep. And then I asked her about the how many voices she was hearing. And she said she was hearing, I think it was one male and a screaming baby. And I went, well, screaming baby is unusual. I only heard that once before, and that was from a patient who had an abortion.
Mm.
And then she comes out and she said, yeah, I did have an abortion when I was 19, I think she said.
Oh my God.
So, you know, it was, she perceived that as the baby that she murdered was screaming.
Whoa.
You know. And then she's, you know, she talked about the voices talking behind her back and arguing with one another. So, which is interesting. I've heard that before. They, you know, they argue with one another about what they should do or what they should say. You know, but another schizophrenic who is hearing voices can't hear her voices, and you know, it's only within their heads. It doesn't move out. So the voices in the head of one schizophrenic can't talk or don't talk to the voices in the head of another. Yeah.
That's interesting.
And that was one thing I was curious about also, and I asked a bunch of them about that. So I think she said she was 16 when she got that that abortion, and then she started having night terrors about demons murdering her baby. And then she said a weird thing. It was when she woke up at 16, she saw pieces of the baby that they had taken out. And that horrified her, that freaked her out. And she just kept remunerating on that. And then she started hearing the screaming of the baby, and it would get real high pitched. She said at one point it actually shattered the window of her bedroom, that it got so bad. And she said one night that the alarm clock fell on the floor, and it was blinking 12 midnight, and fell on the floor, and it shattered into a bunch of pieces. And I'm not sure whether this was true or a hallucination, but she experienced it as if it were true, and she was telling me as if it were true. She said after it fell to the floor and shattered, the pieces rose up into the air. And after a while, she started seeing symbols, dreaming about symbols. And it reminded me of that movie, what was it? What was the guy who was Beautiful Mind or something to that effect, where this guy was painting symbols all over the place.
Right. Yeah.
Well, that's the only patient I've ever met who actually did the symbols. I'd never met another one who painted symbols all over a wall. You know? This one did, and she said that the demons started coming through the symbols.
Like sigils.
And you know, I asked her if she was hearing the voices right now. So what I wanted to do, I only had a limited amount of time. One thing they have to know is, if they're going to do any work on their own, is that these things aren't who they are, that it's not their minds, and this voice is not them who's speaking to them. They have to know that. Otherwise, they'll believe what psychiatry says. Their minds are broken. There's nothing they can do about it, and they just have to take the drugs. I mean, it's a very helpless feeling where you can't do anything yourself.
Right.
You know, it's like, well, you just got to trust these guys to do everything for you. You can't fight back on your own, right, because, you know, you don't know what to do, and all they're telling you to do is take meds. So, you know, once they know that these aren't their minds, it's not their mind who's speaking to them, that these are entities that are separate, that makes a huge difference, because now it's like, it's not them, it's an enemy aside from who they are. Yep. You know, their mind isn't nuts, their mind isn't broken. This is an outside entity. This is an outside, like a psychiatric virus that
yep.
has invaded
Archon.
their mind.
Yep.
Archons, and is kind of feeding on them. So I wanted, she already understood that they were liars. She already understood that they weren't who she was. You know, so
that's two big steps.
That's huge steps. So that and the fact that they were parasites are the three things that I was trying to get through in the emergency room before I had to turn them over. Sure. Either admit them or turn them loose to the street, or, you know, whatever. They needed those three pieces of information to help themselves. Now, the one that really triggered the voices and they went nuts on was when I started to bring up that they were energetic parasites.
Right.
Now, they went nuts when that happened. I mean, and it was predictably nuts. It happened virtually every single time. So what I started doing is thinking about how much information can I get through to them before I have to bring up that particular facet, because that was the one that caused the explosion. So I would get through the fact that, you know, they're not who you are, that they're negative, that they tell you these kind of things. And a lot of times I'd ask them, you know, I'd keep in touch. What are your voices saying? What are the voices saying? Up to the point where I brought up the energetic parasite stuff, they were quietly listening. You know, and I had one patient in the prison who I asked about that, and I said, "Hey, show your voices this." I had something to show him, and I gave it to him, and he said they can see it. You know, they can see it through his eyes, and that's the first time I realized they're looking through the patient's eyes. You know, so they can see everything the patient sees. They can hear everything the patient hears. So I asked her, I said, "Are you hearing them right now?" And she said, "No, but they're listening." So they were listening to everything I had to say. And I told her, I said, "Well, okay, you're not hearing them now, but you will be in about 5 minutes. And they're going to be real pissed off. And this is what they're going to tell you. And this is pretty much the order they're going to tell you. They're going to tell you that I'm stupid, I'm crazy, I'm a liar, you know, that I'm dangerous, and to get away from me, and to get out of my office. And if you don't do those things, they're going to tell you to attack me." And
So
that would roll off.
Yeah, your experience is making you get ahead of the thing.
Right.
That's brilliant. Brilliant.
Well, I could use that against them, because and that was so strange, because they would not alter that. You know,
They couldn't.
I think I don't know why they couldn't, but they couldn't.
Yeah.
You know, I could tell the patient, this is what's going to happen. And instead of them doing something else or ignoring me or something like that, no, it would roll off just as I predicted. Once that happened, the patient would go, "How did you know this?" You know, and then I had their attention. Right. You know, they know, well, this guy knows a whole lot more about these things than I do. And they would not leave, you know, because they wanted, I was the first one who understood and knew what was going to happen with these things. So they would stay and they would listen. You know? So I told her that. And I also told them that if they couldn't handle the explosion from the voices, that they were free to leave. You know, and that was really important with the prisoners, because they, you know, they're kind of going, well, if I walk out of here, I'm going to be in trouble. And I would always tell them, no, you're free to go. I'll catch up with you later. You know, go rest, stay out of trouble. You're free to leave anytime you want. If you can't deal with this, here's the door, go. And I told her the same thing. And when I told her, if they can't get you to leave, if they can't get you to try to run from the ER, they're going to tell you to attack me. And the common response for most of them to that was like, well, I'm not going to do that. And I'd say, well, I know you're not, but they're going to tell you to. And indeed they did. You know, so we kind of agreed upon that. And I told her, if you have to leave, go, and I'll catch up with you later. And let me see, I asked her about the energy drain, you know, because that's a workup to their draining. Yeah, and that's something that I asked her, you know, do you feel exhausted? Do you feel completely drained after the voices attack? And she said, yeah, I do. You know, and I said, she said, how do you know this? And I kind of diverted her and said, well, you didn't use that energy just laying around in bed, did you? You know, you're just trying to get to sleep. You weren't doing any physical labor. And she said, no. And I said, well, if you didn't use it, where did it go? And she was the first one. Now, this was another thing that was real unusual for patients. 90% of them would say, I don't know. You know, I don't know where it goes. She said, they took it. And it blew me away. It's like, this is the first one I encountered in a long time who was aware, and I was kind of stunned. So not only did she know the other stuff that I needed to get through to her, she also knew they were energy parasites. And I'm like, this lady is very unusual. You know, so I'm like, okay, I got to get this through to her. So she knew they were energy parasites. But what I wanted to hear. She told me when she was in the ER that she was watching a doctor give a diagnosis to a patient in the formal ER. And she was watching these. Now, I didn't know this at the time, so let me hold this off. So she asked me if I could hear them. And I said, no, I can't hear them. I can't see them, but I can feel them. And then she said, I can see them and hear them. And I said, what do they look like? She said, some are big and dark. Some look like evil angels. She said, some look like creeping shadows, and some look like snakes and cats. So here I'm taking all this in, like, you know, well, that's interesting. And I said, what were they doing in the ER? And I remember her telling me I never saw more of them than I saw while I was in the ER. You know, in where all the other the medical patients were, you know, just full. And I said, what were they doing? And, you know, as soon as I asked her that question, her face just turned white. And then she hunched over and she put her hands over her head like this and then over her eyes too. And then she started squirming in the chair. And then she jumped to her feet and she started pacing back and forth. And that took me by surprise. You know, it was like, whoa, what's going on here? So I'm thinking, whatever these voices are, they don't want me to have that information. And they're torturing her so she won't give it to me. So she looked like a caged animal. And then she goes, I got to get out of here. I got to get out of here now. So I move out of the way, open the door, and I said, go. She runs out. And she runs over to the patient bathroom and it's locked. So then she paces around the floor in the lobby a little bit. And I'm kind of standing outside the door for a minute watching her. And I'm going, okay, now what is the psych nurse going to think about this? You know, when something like that happens, you go back in and you go, well, what did you do to her?
Right.
That was their first question. And yeah, I don't want to even get into that with these guys. You know, they have no idea what's going on in there. They have a camera, so you know, if they're watching it, they can tell if you're being attacked, but they can't hear anything. You know, there's no audio to it. So she runs into the bathroom. She can't get in there. She paces the floor some. I go back in. I start, you know, I leave the door open and I'm writing some notes. And then she comes back in and she's pacing around and she asked, can I leave the door open? And I was a little leery about that because if you leave the door open, then another patient can get in, or the staff can hear what we're talking about, but she wasn't comfortable unless I did that. So I left it cracked a little bit and I lowered my voice a little bit. And then I went, you know, they're hitting you pretty hard, aren't they? And, you know, what surprised me was that usually when they're hitting the patient, they also hit me, you know, and it happens simultaneously. So they're hearing voices screaming in their heads, and what I'm getting is this icky electrical feeling, and there's no other feeling in the world like it. It's like it's not quite like a chill, but it's just this icky electrical feeling that I feel over my body, and it's like a pressure.
Yeah,
there's pressure to it, and there's nothing else like it. I've never experienced anything else like it. It's unique to these things, and you know, 99% of the time when I experience that, it's working with a schizophrenic patient in the ER or in the hospital. And there was one time I was meditating on my roof and I felt it. And I'm like, what's going on here? You know, I was being hit and I wasn't anywhere near the hospital. Yeah. So that weirded me out. So it kind of makes my skin crawl. And they were very strong. It was very strong. And this has only happened a handful of times to me. It was so strong that I couldn't think. It was like somebody had poured syrup on my brain and I'm struggling to formulate the thoughts, you know.
Well, your brain is electricity. So what they're doing is they're overwhelming your own electrical circuits in the brain, which is what they're doing to the victims too.
Well, I think that there may be something to it because you know, the victims are kind of confused and I was like struggling to formulate my thoughts. It was like nothing's ever like that has ever happened to me. Even when you drink a lot of alcohol, it wasn't like that. It was like my thoughts were stuck in the muck, and I couldn't get them out. And I'd never experienced anything like that, I don't think, up until that point. I might have. Yeah, I did in the prison. So I kind of knew what it was, but it doesn't happen that often. And it only happens with the voices that are very strong.
Right.
You know, normal ones, it doesn't happen. So they're hitting her, they're hitting me, and she's pacing. She says there were two of them now, and that the babies were screaming, and that there was no way I can reach her now because they were just so loud. They had completely taken over her mind. And she was looking, you know, she was terrified. I mean, she was kind of panicking, like, because they were hitting her very strong. And I said, okay, let's shut them up. Now, if I've thoughts are things. Now, I kind of found this out by reading some shamanic stuff and reading some another therapist who kind of works with this stuff. What you can visualize to attack them in their world actually materializes in their world.
Right.
You know, which is strange because you're thinking it, and you don't see it as having any form or anything. It's just kind of a thought, and you know, you're always having thoughts. So I found out that if I visualized a explosion of light happening in the patient, a massive explosion of light, and these things being blasted out, and then a net of light coming and sweeping them up and putting them into a big box of white light that they couldn't get out of, that the physical symptoms of the attack would dissipate.
Right.
You know, so she was having headaches and anxiety and all this. That stuff would stop once I do that. And what surprised me is that they could speak through that box of light. They could still, you know, the physical stuff that they were causing. So that icky feeling that I had, and the headaches and the anxiety and the patient was having, those things would disappear once these things were put in the box of light, but they could still speak through it.
Right.
So what I would do, and this sounds bizarre, I mean, I know it sounds bizarre, I would get a diagnosis right now from any psychiatrist of schizoaffective. But I swear to God, this is how it happened. Matter of fact, I'd already got that once, and I was furious. I'm like, this guy's got his head so far up his butt, he's never going to see daylight. But once that happened, the physical stuff stopped. The icky crap with me stopped, but they were still talking to her. So I visualized a roll of duct tape being wrapped around all their mouths, including the baby. And what was strange was she said, they're no longer speaking, but they're going, and I'm like, okay, that's a new twist to this. You know, it's another world. It's a totally another world. And when I first entered this, I had no idea, you know, what the roadmap was. I had no map. You know, it was just like, okay, I'm here. What do I do? Where do I go? What's happening? What are these things? How do they function? Can they get me? I mean, it was like, by this time I had a good cognitive map of what's happening, what they do, what to expect. But all that was learned through the College of Hard Knocks. I mean, I paid dearly for that information. So we did that, and they shut up. And I asked her, okay, are they gone? And she goes, yeah. She said something like, the silence is deafening, or I haven't heard silence like that in years. And I think I also asked, I also asked for Archangel Michael to help out too. I usually do that, you know, so you can bring in the positive spiritual forces,
right,
and ask them, but they won't come unless you ask.
That's right.
You have to ask, and the patient has to ask. So the voices disappeared. They went silent. And
what a relief.
Well, they will come back. This is only a temporary thing,
right.
So I could get through to her. So she said, I don't remember the last time it was so quiet. She said, how did you do that? And I said, I'll tell you in a minute, but I want you to tell me first what you saw while you were in the ER. You know, what were these shadows doing? What were the things you saw? What were they doing there? and she said they were attaching themselves to people.
Yep.
And she said they had their hands on patients who were lying in bed. She said they were making them sick. Yeah. And she said she watched one doctor give a diagnosis to a patient. And she was watching this, and as he was giving the diagnosis, she saw black toads pouring out of his mouth. And then she said, she looked at me and she said, if the patient believes what he was saying, he would get that illness. And that blew me away. It's like,
because doctors are such an authority figure that you would believe them. I mean, 90%.
Well, yeah, but what was so strange about it was the doctor was giving the patient that illness, according to her, and she was seeing things that I couldn't. You know, so
the doctor also had entities attached to it.
Well, I maybe I never thought about it that way, but if they were coming out of his mouth,
yep, that's what's going on.
You know, and they were black toads, and I'm finding all this fascinating.
Maybe that's why the doctors don't want to really help them.
Well, this was a medical doctor. This one, it wasn't a psychiatrist.
You can be a medical doctor and function just perfectly and still have archons attached to you. In fact, probably if you immerse yourself in that society, your chances of getting attachments are very high, I think.
Well, I think with psychiatrists, that's especially true.
Exactly.
Judging from their suicide rate.
Yep.
But she also said she saw angels working in there too.
Yep.
You know, and I asked her, well, what did the angels look like? And soon as I asked that question, my skin started to crawl again. It was like they were coming on like gangbusters. And again, I found it difficult to speak. And I'm looking at her, and I'm feeling like I'm being crushed, and she's sitting there like nothing's happening, which is highly unusual. Usually we're both hit at the same time. You know, so she's being hit, I'm being hit, but I'm being hit, and she's just sitting there like nothing's happening. So I'm like, another odd twist. You know, and I'm like, what is going on here? Why aren't they getting us both? Why are they just getting me? And I asked her, I said, did they come back, or are they hitting you? And she goes, no, they're not hitting me. And I'm struggling to speak because they were so, I mean, I wasn't hearing anything, but it was just that brain fog. You know, I'm like asking her, like, well, what is it that's hitting me if they're not hitting you? And I kind of had to struggle to get the words out. She goes, well, that's their commander. So I knew they had echelons because the prisoners told me that.
Yeah.
It was growing in intensity. And she said, it's the dark commander, it's the dark entity that's over the others. So I guess it was like the Bigkahuna. And I don't know how many different levels they have. I know they have at least 2, because that happened to me in the prison too. Yep. You know, I think I asked for help, and that dissipated. And then I asked her, back to questioning again. I said, well, what did the angels look like? So I wanted this information because they were trying to block it. And if they were trying to block it, I wanted it. And she said they were much bigger than the dark ones. And then she got hit. She stopped speaking, and she's kind of looking, you know, inside herself. And I could see she was being hit. So I said, the buzzards aren't letting up, are they? And I said, this is their last ditch effort to stop you from telling me what was going on in there. So I said, you do it this time. I said, you ask your guardian angels for help to drive them away.
Yep.
Okay. Now, a lot of times that works. It doesn't last, but it works long enough for them to see that there is some outside force they can call on to make these things disappear if they ask earnestly. You know, right. If they just go, oh, yeah, guardian angels come in. No, but if they ask earnestly, right. Much of the time, something will appear and shut these things up temporarily.
Absolutely.
You know?
Yep.
Now, once they see that, they know there's a positive side also. So that's a good teaching tool for
yep.
them also. I asked her, I said, okay, ask your guardian angels and pray to get rid of these things. And then she started praying for strength. And I find that a lot of them do that. Instead of asking to get rid of them, they pray for, oh, give me the strength to deal with this. And I said, no, don't do that, because they'll take it. You know, don't pray for strength. Pray to get rid of them. You know, so once she did that, she closed her eyes and they went away, you know, temporarily. And I told her, I said, they'll be back, you know, until you can heal all the psychic wounds that happened to you. But at least in the meantime, I can communicate with you. They're not blocking me out anymore. So she learned something for herself there too, that she could do this. And that's another thing that I tried to teach patients. In the ER, they didn't give you very much time. You know, they're always pushing, oh, here's another one, here's another one. Get those. It's like a big revolving door. Get them in, drug them, kick them out. They go off their meds 2 weeks later and they're back again. And in the meantime, they're milking the dickens out of the insurance agencies, you know, charging them thousands of dollars on each round. They're not curing anything. They're putting them on the meds. They release them. They go off their meds, and then they come back again. I mean, it's just like a big revolving door. They're doing nothing beneficial for the patient in the long run at all. Let me say. I asked her, well, you know, what are you going to do the next time the voices come? And she knew to pray. She knew there was a pack of lies. You know, one of the things they do is they make them forget all the stuff I tell them to do once they get out.
Sure.
You know, so by the time they leave the session, they've forgotten 85% of what I told them. You know? So I usually ask them, I say, okay, what did I tell you to do when you're out there on your own? And very few of them can repeat all the things I've told them to do to fight against the voices. Lily was like, bam, 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 bam. She remembered every single one, which was another highly unusual thing that happened. And she repeated it accurately, you know, which took me back. And then the psych nurse knocks on the door and goes, hey, you know, you're taking too much time in there. You got to get out here and help us clear the ER. So I told her, I said, well, I just got to finish them up. I just got another minute or two. And she leaves, closes the door. And then suddenly Lily just blurts out, I mean, just out of nowhere. I mean, she says, evil attracts evil. And I attract, and evil I attracted when I was molested. And that was passed on, the molestation was passed on to my daughter. My daughter was also sexually molested, and the man who molested her is dead. I mean, this came out of nowhere. I mean, it was like she's just sitting there. All of a sudden, she blurts this out. And I go, well, what happened to him? And she doesn't answer. She just gets a sly look on her face like,
the Cheshire cat.
Yeah, yeah.
She knows something.
She knows something, and I knew something, and I'm like, when I realized she'd killed this guy,
yeah,
I was stunned.
Good for her.
Know, and I, well, at the moment I wasn't thinking that. I was just like thinking she killed somebody, you know. And I'm staring at the floor, and she notices this. You know, she noticed that I'm shocked. I'm staring at the floor, and then she goes, I'm sorry if I upset you. And she said this very soft and compassionately. And she asked me, she says, are you okay? And so here's this psychotic killer worried about me. And I'm like, it just twisted my head again. It's like she twisted my head so many times in that interview. It's like, boom, 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 boom. And I look up at her and I said, well, yeah, I guess so. I just wasn't expecting that. You know?
So did you ever follow up with her? Whatever happened
never
to her?
saw her again.
Oh, or maybe you made her better. Maybe she got better.
I don't know. It's up to her. I mean, she had the information when she left.
Well, you know, was a very unusual patient too. She kept herself clean, and so she was already maybe halfway through, and you just helped pave the road through the wilderness for her.
Well, that's what I was hoping to do in the ER, if I could get that. But you had to be very careful about which patients you gave this information to. There were more than one time where the parent got hold of bits and pieces of it, and then, you know, what are you telling me? Are you telling me that my daughter or son is possessed? Is that what you're telling me? And I'm like, all right, not quite, but you know. So it was
touchy because it borders on to spirituality and religion, and that's the problem and why it's forbidden.
Oh, that's a huge problem because
Yep.
all through college and all through graduate school, there was a strict line between religion, spirituality, and whatever bunk they were teaching you, and they wouldn't let it bleed through. It was.
I would actually contend that the institutions that do not want to bring those subjects into their realm may themselves be influenced by these entities.
Well, you look at how that all came about back in the 1930s with the Flexner Report and what Standard Oil's billionaire, millionaire, where they made it illegal for any natural healer to practice medicine.
John D. Rockefeller.
Rockefeller, and there was one other one that did that too, but they put out this Flexner Report, and then they bought off the Congress and got them to pass it. So the only people who could practice medicine were the ones who went to or could get licensed in medicine were the ones who went to these handful of schools, that were approved by these millionaire guys who were making a fortune off the pharmaceutical industry.
Which is another industry which needs to be examined closely.
Oh, badly, very badly.
Yeah, they're doing a lot of damage. And again, I think that this is at least partially at the root of what's going on today. And I think, I was reading an article about this thing. It was called the Wichita Massacre. It was in 2001, I think, in Wichita, in which two brothers took 5 friends and essentially tortured them and molested them and then eventually shot them in the head. And they're still alive. They're on death row in Kansas. And I was really tempted, to write to one of them about this. What motivated you to do this? What caused you? Did you hear I was going to be straight up. Did you hear voices in your head? Do you feel bad about this now? And all that. But I didn't do it because I was afraid that, they'd probably get rid of the letter and, on the way in, because they make sure that the prisoners, don't see anything that upsets them. The last thing you want is a mass murderer getting upset, And
well, I know they go through the mail, but you might be able to pull something like that off.
Well, I'm going to try it.
They might let that through.
Yeah, I'm going to try it because, they were young and they were on drugs and I'm really beginning to think about the criminal mind, and that is the criminal mind being driven by these voices, especially the violent criminals.
Well, of course. I mean, everything happens in your head. It all happens in here. There's nothing out there. Everything you see is happening in here. It's all happening in there. And here's the psychiatrist going, oh yeah, schizophrenia is a thought disorder. But do you think they spend any time studying the disordered thoughts, where they come from, how they manifest? Oh, it's a thought disorder. And yeah, these drugs will do something to it. They haven't spent any time studying the thoughts, where they come from, how they manifest, how to get rid of them, how to turn your head off.
I'm actually convinced that outside of antibiotics and most of the drugs that they're giving you, doctors and psychiatrists and psychologists, are more for them. It's patient management. I mean, it used to be that, you'd go to the dentist and he'd, do your root canal or whatever. But now they put you out. Now, when you go in there, they put you to sleep for the same thing that 20 years ago, they would not have put you to sleep for. And I'm out, because I don't want to be put asleep. So I'm saying, no, I'll go through the pain of it, the discomfort, because I don't want to have 100,000 brain cells disappear. Right. And I don't trust you anyway. And the dentist get really upset with me because I did that, right? Because he doesn't want me squirming or gasping in pain or whatever. And and he got really upset with me, but I insisted. And I realized it had nothing to do with me. It had to do with him, and the fact that he wanted me to not be a problem for him. The same thing with these psychotic drugs. They're not doing it for the patient. They're doing it so that they can rest in peace from the maniac patient is now quiet.
Well, that certainly was true in the mental institutions. Yeah, that's you saw from the history in the book, all the things that they did for patient management.
Oh,
And these
Lord.
drugs were the only thing that actually worked to some degree.
This book, Madhouse, details what they used to do before they had the drugs. And everything from electroshock to hanging people upside down and pouring water into their mouth. I mean, it is absolutely horrifying the way that they treated these people. And I'm really tempted to do a documentary on the whole thing, because I think it's like one of the biggest scandals in American history. And it's still going on. They just changed their methods, that's all.
Well, I'd be glad to help you with that. I mean,
Oh, good. I'd love to have you.
Yeah, I watched one of those shock treatments back in the 70s. I can
Yeah.
tell you that tale if you want to hear it. It was nasty.
The thing is that, okay, so I want to get to that, because so if you do a deep dive into alternative spirituality, like Yogananda, you read his books, or you read Swedenborg or Robert Monroe, what they tell you is that there's in this universe, that everything has like an etheric double. So the sun has an etheric double, the earth has an etheric double, you have an etheric double, your cat has an etheric double. All right. And what this etheric double is it's a plasma centered double. So you have a double that we would call your astral double. That's the one that travels in the astral body and goes out of the body. I call it more precisely a plasma body. And because this universe, the second earth, is made out of plasma. And plasma is the secret fire in alchemy. It's the fire that does not burn. And it's electrical in nature. It's gas, electrical and gas, you might say. And so if you take the four elements, earth, water, air, and fire, those are also the four elements. So earth is physical matter, air is gases, and water are liquids, and fire is plasma. And 99% of the universe is plasma. And if you look at telescope pictures, especially Hubble, you will see these, what they call Birkeland currents. And these are gigantic, millions of miles of currents that are connecting between stars, which are also plasma. And these Birkeland currents look just like blood plasma.
And highways.
Yeah, they do. And so we are electrical in nature. Our brains are electrical. Our bodies are that's why our blood is red. It's magnetic. And these creatures occupy this second earth. And they're all around us all the time. There's good ones, there's bad ones, there's indifferent ones. Just like walking through the jungle, you're going to have animals that don't like you, animals that don't care about you, and some animals will be friendly to you. And so what you want to do, of course, when you're in a precarious situation like being in a jungle, you want to make sure that the bad animals don't attack you. So you do precautions. You take precautions. You have a list of things that you do. I was just in the jungle, and you can get bit by something and be sick within 30 seconds. An insect, and the world is like that. And what I'm saying is that we are walking around at the bottom of an ocean that we can't see, that we don't know, and there are animals, entities in that ocean that will come and do you in if you're not careful. And
I fully agree. I fully agree.
And this is the secret of the occult world. I don't like the word occult. A spiritual world. And this is what alchemists do. What alchemists do is they create what they call the philosopher's stone, which is an attractor of the good entities. That's all it is. It attracts in good entities until your philosopher's stone is like full of this plasma. It begins glowing when it gets full of this plasma, and then they ingest some of it, and then they have that in them, which gives them health and enlightenment and things like that. And so the alchemists were very much aware of this plasma world, and they used it to their advantage. And the anti-alchemists know about this world also, and they use the negative energies to their advantage. And so this world that we live in is built around the accumulation of negative energy. And money itself isn't negative, but the desire to have vast amounts of money is a negative idea. And so these things are electrical, and they're all around us. And that's why your hair stands up when you go to a place that's haunted, for instance. That's probably a human entity that can't find its way back in the afterlife. And it's hanging around in its house, reliving some kind of recycling, probably psychotic kind of thing. And when you go to a haunted house, like the Stanley Hotel in Estes Park, Colorado, you know, a 150-year-old hotel that's been haunted by all these spirits, your hair stands on end, the neck hair stands on end. That's because you're around all this electrical energy that's running rampant. But also, the thing that I really like about your work is the one thing that's always bugged me in life is people who are irrational. You'll be with someone and they'll just have a series of irrational ideas. And I've never understood why they would waste their time pursuing all this irrationality. But now I get it. The irrational ideas are probably these voices telling them irrational ideas for the fun of it. Because I really think that these voices are pernicious, and they command people to do things. How many times have you heard a criminal telling you that they heard a voice telling them to go do something and they just did it, and then regret it all the time? Yeah. And they don't know why they did it, and a lot of times they don't even remember doing it. Like Sirhan heard a voice that told him to kill JFK or RFK, Robert Kennedy. Over and over and over, he heard this voice, and he went and he does not to this day remember shooting Robert Kennedy, even though 40 witnesses saw him do it and everything. And he said the voice went away as soon as he killed Robert Kennedy. He said that went away, and he felt like an idiot, right, that he had done it. And so we see this over and over, and I believe that the root of our spiritual problems is this, that we need to find protocols that, like what you're discovering, that allow us to quell those voices, and we'll have a much happier world.
On our own. On our own. So kind of take this out of the hands of psychiatry, which is poisoning people with those drugs, and teach people how to get rid of these things on their own. And the schizophrenics are just the far end of the normal curve. These things hit us all. That's but they're most visible, they're most evident in schizophrenics. You study that bottom 5%, and it's very clear if you just open your head and look and ask them. I mean, talk to them. These guys don't talk to them. You know, they don't ask them about the voices. There's repercussions for even talking about the voices. I mean, you get in a lot of trouble for just talking about them.
You will, because you're actually getting to the root of the problem. They're going to explode on you and try to do things against you because you've discovered them. There's a great movie, one of my favorite all-time movies, and I want to talk about this in a second, called The Mothman Prophecies. And in this movie,
I saw that movie.
Richard Gere keeps having all these odd experiences, right? And he doesn't know what's going on. And finally, near the end of the movie, he goes to this spiritual expert, right? I can't remember the actor. He's one of my favorite actors. I think he's dead now. And he goes, what's going on? And the British actor goes, well, you noticed them, and they noticed that you noticed them. And I think that's a lot of it right there.
I think you're right.
Yep. And that brings up another thing, which the Mothman Prophecies talked about, because the Mothman Prophecies was based on a real story of the destruction of the bridge over the Ohio River that links West Virginia and Ohio. And in the 1960s, I think 67 it happened. And what happened is that for months before the bridge collapsed, there were all these odd sightings of dark beings with no faces flying around and haunting people, and people having weird accidents and encounters with strange beings, and just a lot of weird things. And John Keel, who wrote the book, was an investigator, paranormal investigator, and he, drove to West Virginia to investigate and was taking notes and talking to people and everything. And he said the events got worse and worse and worse, and no one really knew what was going on until, boom, the bridge collapsed, right? And 40 people died and all of this. And his conclusion at the end of the book, don't really tell you at the end of the movie, but at the end of his book, he says that these entities knew that a horrifying event was about to happen in 6 weeks from the future, and they were gathering at the spot. And that's what these people were seeing, and why the window was temporarily open between the two worlds, and people were actually seeing these entities gathering up around the bridge. And there were there's a photograph of the bridge taken like a day or two before, and you can see something is up on top of one of the towers. A dark little figure, like maybe 3 or 4 feet high, is on the tower. So there was actually a photograph of it. And there's also, this is really interesting also, there's a movie on Netflix which also talks about this, and actually the special effects in this movie actually show you the Archons, and it's called Odd Thomas. And Odd Thomas is this psychic kid who works in a restaurant, a fast food restaurant in a shopping mall, and he can see the Archons. That's established at the beginning of the movie. But as the movie progresses, he notices that in the shopping mall, there's more and more Archons gathering, and he doesn't know why. At the end of the movie, a mass murderer comes into the shopping mall and kills a bunch of people, and you can actually see the Archons going into the scene where all the mayhem is happening. It's a very interesting movie, and it's based on a novel by Dean Koontz. Now, why that's interesting is because Dean Koontz also wrote a novel in 1981 called Dark Eyes, I believe it. And in that novel, he actually predicts a pneumonia-like flu hitting and attacking the human population in the year 2020. So I don't know.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Very interesting. Like the entities are gathering up now, right, for the big event that's happening now, which is all these people dying from this disease. I'm not saying that's happening, folks. I'm just pointing out that somebody wrote this book about Archons and also wrote another book about, predicted exactly when the flu pneumonia would hit, and cosmic coincidence machines working overtime there. So
yeah, I remember that Mothman prophecies. It shocked me. It sent chills up my back, as did the Exorcist, because I was working at the state hospital when we drove from Milledgeville to Atlanta to go see the Exorcist, and I was so shook up after watching that I completely missed the turnoff on the highway. I was heading up to the next town before I woke up, because it was so close to what I was experiencing with these psychotic patients I was working with. It was like it just warped my head. It was
I actually got in a letter writing deal with William Peter Blatty, who wrote The Exorcist in the late 70s, and it was based on a real story. The kid, I think it's St. Louis, and this kid literally had the ability to blow everybody against the wall. Electrical force shooting out of him, and grown men. This 12-year-old boy was able to blow people back to the walls, and Blatty was believe it or not, he was actually in the intelligence agencies. But he was a Orthodox Catholic also. And he told me in these letters that the intelligence agencies were looking at these possessions and trying to figure out what was really going on, because the people possessed were giving information out that they could not possibly have known. And that's why they were really interested in the whole thing. And that's how Blatty got involved. Then later he moved to Hollywood and became a screenwriter. But at his early years were in the intelligence agencies actually looking into this stuff. And all the way to the end, he was totally convinced that there was an evil, pernicious force on this planet which seek to destroy the human race.
Well, look what's going on right now. You know, the constant wars, the lying politicians, the scams, the robberies, the rapes, the sexual exploitation. I mean, look at it. I mean, it's out of control.
It's got to be the voices doing it. And so we have to find some kind of protocol, which you have now opened the door to finding a way to relieve the suffering, because it'll relieve everyone's suffering, not just the patient. We're all going to be better off if we face up to this, and we're not going to start a cult or a religion around it. That's not what we're doing. What we're going to do is, on an individual basis, we need to tell people that the voices are real, that they're not them. And that's a huge relief I've found, to the people that I know that'll hear voices. When I told them that it wasn't them, you could just see the relief on their faces, like, oh my God, thank God, I'm not capable of thinking these things, right? That's the thing, is they think that they're the ones that are thinking it. That's the big trick with the voices, is that they make you think that you are thinking this when you're not.
Yeah, and I've had a number of patients who asked the voices, "Who are you?" And guess what their response was?
What?
Guess. Take a guess.
We are legend.
We are you.
We are you. Oh my God.
We are you. They don't want you to realize that they are different from you. So that's one level. But another level is just the voice that you have in your head. I think we talked about this last time a little bit, is not you either. Most people think that that voice that they hear, that they identify with, is who they are. But again, we talked about, if you can pull back and watch the ideas, the thoughts come into your head, and sit back and listen to those thoughts come into your head, then you have to ask yourself, who's the watcher? You aren't your thoughts. These are programs. And I think Dr. Dispenza said, if you're thinking, you're running a program.
Yep.
Yeah. So to shut down those programs and get back to the zero state where there's silence. That's where
I highly recommend everybody read Joe Dispenza's books.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, they're really good. He really shows you a positive way out of this.
That and another one by Joe Vitale.
Joe Vitale, yep. He's great too.
It's Zero Limits.
Zero Limits.
Which talks about the findings of a Hawaiian shaman and how to shut down that crap that's constantly going through your head and get back to the silence. And I think I talked about that trip to the bottom of the lake I had when that voice was trying to convince me I was going to drown. It's that silence. That's what's there past all the input that's coming in from your eyes and your ears and your skin and other people and the brainwashing that's going on through the TV. It's that silence. That's who you are.
Yeah, and most of the Eastern traditions, that's what they're attempting to do, is silence the voices. Zen or whatever. And they'll slap you on the back with a stick while you're meditating because they know you're hearing the voices. And they go, bam, nope, stop the voices. Right? I'll never forget. One time I was surfing in Southern California, and I got hit by a riptide. And we call it the washing machine. So you start going around in the water with your surfboards clipped to your foot, your ankle. And I was in this washing machine for maybe a minute, and it was starting to drown. And I came back up and I gasped for air, and I was about 2 miles off the beach.
Wow.
Yeah, and it was really scary. And so I got on my board and I started paddling to try to get back, and it was really tough. And I had this voice in my head going, "You're never going to make it. You're too tired. The washing machine tired you out. You can't do this. It's impossible." And I was like, "Shut up!
Same thing.
Shut up!"
Yeah. So you've been there.
Yeah.
Same one.
Yep. And you made me remember it with your tale about the lake, that I actually had an encounter with a negative voice that wanted me literally to die, to give up and not try to swim back to shore. And I wouldn't listen to it, and did get back, obviously. But yeah, I think what we've done is we've covered a lot of ground here. And I think that what you've done as a service to humanity is just, phenomenal. Again, this is the book, Jerry Marzinsky, An Amazing Journey into the Psychotic Mind, Breaking the Spell of the Ivory Tower, which is really what we have to do, because the ivory tower is reinforcing this.
Yes.
Either on purpose or because they don't care. I don't know which. I think it's a little of both.
Well, there's a lot of money involved. The pharmaceutical industry is controlling the ivory tower.
Yeah, so it's actually in their interest to have more people hear voices, malignant voices, and because they're going to sell more drugs. Right. So the TV and the TV shows and the movies and the news and the media are all doing things to make you be in a psychotic state where you'll begin hearing these voices. And so part of the protocol is to stay away from all that junk. I mean, I meet people all the time who just basically repeat what they heard on the news. And it's like a repeating thing in their head, and they believe what they're hearing. And you're like, there's no evidence for what you're saying. You realize there's no evidence for what you're saying. That's somebody on TV who you thought was an authority, but have you seen any evidence for this? And then they're like, no, I really haven't. I go, it's because it's fake. It's fake. And they're using fake news to drive us out of our minds. And
also they're fake illnesses that you turn on the TV, and it's all these, well, if you have these crazy symptoms, well, we have this Zastro Super drug that you can take. Every single one of those diagnoses in the DSM we talked about are all made up. They're all made up. Every single one of them.
If you're watching TV, I hope you're watching something nice, but if you are watching TV, hold the mute button with you. And when those ads come on telling you about
turn them off.
Pharmaceutical, do not let those in. I mean it. Do not let those ads into your head. Do not. They are designed to make you into a chronic, what is the word where you're not sick but you think you are? Hypochondriac. Those ads are designed to make you into a hypochondriac, to believe
they're selling illness. They're selling illness.
They are. They're selling illness. And you're supposed to go to your doctor and tell him that you have the illness so he can give you the drug that they're advertising. What?
Isn't that bizarre? Isn't that absolutely bizarre?
Totally
but they're
bizarre.
getting away with it. And they've been getting away with it for decades.
Yeah. So you have to stay away from all this negativity. That's the key. Do something positive for yourself every day. There's a great station on Sirius called Spa, which they refuse to have any vocals and no percussion. And it's really good for inducing a positive state. Yoga is really good. Meditation is really good. And walking in nature, walk in the woods, breathe fresh air, get sunshine. These are the keys and eat healthy food and stay away from drugs and alcohol. That's the key to at least a start to getting away from these voices. They can be quelled, and we are now, I think, finally admitting to ourselves that this is the problem. And so, the first step to solving a problem is admitting that you have it, and we have this problem, and now we have to solve it. And so since the establishment seems hell-bent on creating memes and media that induce these things, we have to reject them too. And so find positive YouTube shows, listen to positive music, do spiritual things. And nature is a great healer too.
It is. And the program that Sherry kind of refined, the That's a Lie program, keep in mind that every negative thought about yourself or somebody else is put into your mind by these things. And you need to call that a lie. So as soon as something comes up, oh, you're stupid, that's a lie. Or you're ugly, that's a lie. Or you're never going to succeed at anything. You need to counter that with that's a lie. Because if you buy it, they're like fishermen. They cast that in and they bait the hook, and they have access to all your memories. Everything rotten you've ever done, they know about it.
Yes, they
so
do.
They'll bait the hook and they'll throw it in front of you, and you can bite on this. And if you do, they got you. And that generates that negative emotional energy that they feed off. So that's a lie program. When you repeat that's a lie to some crazy, stupid thing they accuse you of, doesn't allow them to grip and get a hold of you. Because if you buy into it, then you're feeding them.
I would agree with you completely. And it's a basic fact of life that you have to understand is that most of what you're hearing is a lie. And so you just have to understand that when you hear I like to say, if somebody is telling you something that sounds completely fantastic, it probably is. So, don't believe it. When somebody tells you something, you have your first reaction, go, well, yeah, maybe, but then again, maybe not. And then you'll find your life is also a lot easier because they're making memes, which are causing the voices to go into your head. And that's what the media, and I worked my whole life in media, and I never realized that that's what we were actually doing until I read your book. I mean, I knew it was bad. Don't get me wrong. I knew what we were doing was bad, but I didn't realize that I was actually inducing things that may be very unhealthy. And
Yeah,
so,
and most people who work in that industry they're just playing their part. They don't understand the bigger picture of what they're doing. You know,
yes,
the murder pictures,
yep,
the war pictures, all these negative things that's all producing negative emotion.
it is. And there's not much that you can do but shut it off. And that's what I do now. And I find I'm not even interested. I don't know if it's me, by the way, or if this is happening on a collective level, but you guys can tell me in your comments, are you guys having a hard time watching a movie for 2 hours? Because the last year and a half, I just haven't, I don't know. I think it's the internet is destroying my long-term attention span or something, because I just, I get about halfway through a movie and I'm like, ugh, this is boring. And I turn it off, and I can't get my attention span to do it anymore. And I hear other people telling me the same thing. So maybe the internet is destroying our ability for long-term, but maybe that's a good thing too. We don't know. All I know is that the explosion of the media on the internet has, in the end, will be a positive thing, because we can have points of view like what you're presenting for the first time, because you would never be able to get on mainstream media. Not,
Oh no,
not at
no.
first. Maybe if you break
Nope.
through on the alternative, eventually someone will have you on, but you are going to be banned. I guarantee it.
Oh yeah. Oh, I know it. You know, I have no doubt. That's why I'm going through guys like you,
Yeah,
because I'm not even going to try. You
I
know,
wouldn't
I'm not
either.
even going to try.
I don't try. I have no. In fact, I got asked. I broke the Joan Benet Ramsey murder like 20 years
Oh,
ago, and I've had like requests from CBS and NBC and Fox to be on and talk about it. Nope, no, thank you. I don't want to be on you at all. I know you'll edit what I say and make me look like an idiot, and I don't want anything to do with it. So, and again, why are they doing that? Right?
hmm
How
Well, you look at what
pervasive.
they're doing politically. I mean,
Oh, I
it,
wanted to ask you about that. That's right. I'm glad you brought that up. So after our last talk, I was, flipping around on YouTube like I do, and I got to the State of the Union. Happened in January, I guess.
uh-huh.
I had watched it, and so I decided, I'll watch like 10 minutes of this, and see what's going on, because everybody was talking about it and everything. And so I start watching it, and our president's talking, and I start watching Nancy
Oh,
Pelosi.
Pelosi.
Oh my, she's literally talking back to the voices. She
Yeah,
was.
yeah,
You could
yeah,
hear the
yeah. I
voices
know.
talking to her. She's like,
Yeah,
what?
yeah.
And then she talked. Oh, then she'd realize that somebody was looking at her. And I didn't even watch the rest. I had the sound down. I wasn't listening to it. I just watched her for like a half hour. So, oh my God, that poor woman. She's hearing voices. And I think
Yeah,
she
and you
is.
look up, and she's like, oh, where their eyes are bugging out, and she has that paper cut already, so she could rip it easily
Yeah.
ahead of time. You know.
So you think the voices told her to tear the speech up?
Oh, I'm sure the whole bunch of that crowd, Schumer and
Oh,
Nadler
do
and
they
all of them,
all do they
all of them.
all look like they're possessed?
You know what? They just yesterday, one of the underground stations said that a bunch of people, real rich people who were contributing to them, have been indicted for illegal money laundering or
Right.
something to their campaign. So they're the next step to be brought down. So things are changing all around the world. You look at people are no longer satisfied with the status quo. They're catching on to what's happening, and that these things are controlling us and not for our best interest. And they're rioting all over the world, in Paris, but they won't cover this stuff on mainstream media.
No.
You have to go on the internet and see what's happening in Chile and Paris and Germany and all these places where they're rioting. They won't talk about it.
Yeah, I've noticed that I have myself in the last year and a half been able to start actually seeing this dark cloud around these people.
Oh yeah.
And like I look at Nadler or Adam Schiff or especially Chuck Schumer, and I know what Chuck Schumer's done in his past. Chuck Schumer, whoa. I mean, he is one nasty guy, trust me.
Yes.
And he
Yeah.
has this dark cloud around him. And it's like I can't describe it other than it looks like they have to take a spiritual shower.
Well, yeah, you can feel it though. Just look at him and you could just feel it rolling off him.
You really can. And so I think maybe the human race is going to figure out what they look like, and maybe we'll start rejecting them, because I can now tell who they are. I can, if I meet one, I can tell now. I don't have anything to do with them. Okay, see you later. Yeah. And I tell my wife, don't ever invite that person to our house.
Yeah, I've developed that in the prison, and here's my wife, out there talking to somebody that I'm getting really bad vibes from. I'm
Same
going,
here.
what are you doing? It's like,
And she's so innocent. She's like, oh,
yeah, she doesn't see it. She doesn't. She's not sensitive to it at all. And I grab her and kind of, one time I remember we were in Rome. She was talking to this gypsy who was maneuvering in there to steal her purse.
Sure.
She was just clueless. And then another time we were walking the street late at night, and here's this lone guy, looked real suspicious, and she's wanting to go over that side of the street. And I'm going, wait, what are you, just completely oblivious.
Yeah. So those people also have to learn that there's these dark entities, and then they won't be oblivious to it. But, I love my wife because she's so innocent. So I don't really like to tell her this stuff. But she liked our last show, which I thought surprising, because she doesn't like this kind of darkness, but she loved that show. So.
Well, that's how my wife is too. I can't talk to her about this kind of stuff. She'd go, oh, I don't want to hear it. Yeah. So I'd come home after, some horrendous episode out at the state prison, and my head's spinning, and there's nobody to talk to.
Yeah.
I can't go to my boss and say, oh, I was talking to, prisoner Joe Blow, and his voices came out, and all these weird things were happening. Oh, yeah. No way.
No, come home and you stare at the wall.
Been at this for over 35 years, and they haven't locked me up yet. So they missed their chance.
They're looking for your clones, though. So maybe that's a good thing. Maybe people should get into the field of psychology that understands this, and get in there and do some subterfuge there in the psychiatric realm, and help these people out. Because you got behind the lines and we're able to help. And so maybe other workers that are working in psychology, maybe you guys should take on what Jerry is doing and try to help people. Yes, they're probably going to tattle on you. You're going to get in trouble, but still, at least you're helping, right?
Well, I think you're right, because I'd have a lot of people write in and go, yeah, I suspected this, like psych nurses and
Yep.
Even one one psychiatrist and matter of fact, two psychiatrists at this time, and one psychiatrist student, kind of going, I suspected this, and what you said just makes sense now.
Yep.
I remember this was in one of the psych hospitals, where the patients decided to get together and do this exorcism on this one patient. And I went, well, that's interesting. And one of the nurses watched it, and she was kind of keeping an eye on it, but she didn't stop it. So they started doing their exorcism on this one patient, and one of the administrators found out about it. And boy, they almost
crazy.
Fired her for that. It's like...
Yeah. That is verboten.
Yes.
All right, Jerry, listen, I'm going to close out now. I would really, really want to thank you, not for being on the show, but for your work and your discoveries. And I hope to write another book. I think you should, I could give you some places to look that I think you'd really find interesting, that parallel what you're doing, but they're spiritual books and spiritual practices. I'm sure you probably know about most of them anyway, but any help you can give. And I do want to talk to you about doing a documentary on this. I think it would be very interesting.
Be glad. You've only scratched the surface. I mean, see all these notebooks back here? They're full of case histories.
All right, Jerry.
Case histories.
I want to talk to you later, all right?
Okay.
Thanks.
All righty. You're welcome.